The time has come to talk about one incredibly successful game that is favored by so many and praised for years and years. Game of the year, game of the decade. But is it actually good? The game is difficult to criticize because it's such a well-made story-driven RPG. Incredibly solid in its mechanics, incredibly detailed in its elements, incredibly well written on their own merits, incredibly good at engaging the player, incredibly well presented. It's absolutely tiring to keep raving about The Witcher 3, but to hate on it, you don't come from a pure gameplay hating perspective. The ones that can't say anything good are just really tired of having to just keep rehashing the greatness for years without a break. I'll have to agree that the game's great, but you can absolutely find some things that aren't pure big brain game development, yet nobody ever really mentions it unless they have to make the point about the bad. Because whatever the bad is, it's immediately outshined by the good. To look for the bad in this game is to nitpick, really. I never planned to review this game, even if it was an easy pick, just because it's been praised beyond our plane of existence and I'm not a hardcore fan. I never read the books and I'm a bit discouraged to play the installments before the third. I'm just a player that enjoyed the third game, but I don't feel I had any right to rave about it if I wasn't coming from a deeply engaged perspective, because then I couldn't compare in bringing anything original to the table when discussing The Witcher 3. My lack of brain cells and topics to talk about tell me that if I were to talk about The Witcher 3, I could at least take it a step further by exploring the game's DLCs. The DLCs alone make up an incredible experience and I got it all bundled together for $20. $20 for the base game and both the DLCs. I really feel that I cheated the developers with getting a Steam sale because I'm investing so many hours that at no point ended up being filler hours. A game like The Witcher 3 can accumulate 200 to 300 hours for me when I spend thousands of hours in Rust, Gmod, CS, or APB, but The Witcher 3 is incredible in making every single hour count as the greatest fucking hour spent. Main story, side stories, or looking for ways to improve yourself has given countless encounters that keep you going without stop. You can't go
in and out, 20 minutes adventure.
You go This is how it usually goes. I don't play the game for a couple of months as I spend hours in multiplayer games and my internet starts taking a dive. I start considering something less straining on my connection. I complain about it and I get told the same thing every time. Just play Witcher. Next day I play The Witcher 3 and the days beyond are a blur. I spent the time doing so much of the side content that I forget I have some main objectives I gotta get through. I spent 4 days going around Skellige, mending my relationship with the Skellige people, trying to show a better side to a Witcher, trying to respect their customs, going for Gwent streaks, hunting treasures, getting absolutely frightened by a large whale, helping places with critical situations, ridding curses, apologizing for Yen's behavior, accepting slaying contracts and breaking some hearts for honesty's sake, discovering weird places, and fighting a bear to be the brawling champion of Skellige to realize I came here for some tools for a blacksmith back in Crow's Perch. For 4 days I spent my time in Skellige doing anything but the main thing I was after. I accidentally ran into the cave I was supposed to go in anyway to suddenly remember that I was after those tools all along. Every nook and cranny is worth exploring more than anything. There is a main obvious line you have to follow and can fuck up with your own choices, and pace even, that I'm certainly showing here in my script as well, but the main line is the obvious main objective to follow and experience that I completely ignore for the side content. Everything is in the same level presented technically for there to not have such a difference, but what I absolutely love is that the side stories, contracts, encounters, and everything not in the main objective line is just as interestingly crafted as the main storyline. The quality or value for your time does not drop if you go and explore the side stories, and this is why every hour counts. Anyway, the third game is absolutely fantastic, and this whole time I wanted to segue from how The Witcher 3 is amazing to how the DLCs compare. But what makes this easy and greater is that the DLCs are incredibly different experiences from each other and the main story themes, yet they stand their own ground really well. Alright, I think I've gotten most of it out of my system, so we can move on. Now, the Hearts of Stone section I began to write only after I fully finished the experience and was sure that's the best action to take in writing down the experience. That was clearly a mistake, since after finishing Hearts of Stone, I immediately began Blood and Wine, and that made me forget entirely what I thought about Hearts of Stone. Blood and Wine may have severely resonated more than Hearts of Stone, but it's not that one is better or worse than the other, really. This expansion is actually worth its own damn value because how much it offers as a new diversion for the player. It's not intrusive on the main story or unfairly hiding important story bits behind a paywall. It's an actual DLC, and these days it's tough to say that. Hearts of Stone is an actual expansion to a game's universe, and it extended the game's lifetime. And it won't matter if the Hearts of Stone experience is shorter than the main story, but all it needs is to capture you once and you'll sink into the gameplay, diversions, and side content again. Extending your exposure to the main game elements, Hearts of Stone just rekindles that interest. The DLC story is not supposed to replace the main story length, at least I wouldn't hope for it, but as an interesting side piece made in a main quest, a side piece that shatters any built expectation from the Wild Hunt storyline. The story behind the main quest of Hearts of Stone isn't severely tied to the main story and path, but after the main story, or in the middle of it, Hearts of Stone is a great distraction to begin a new branch that doesn't involve the pressure of time, or Geralt acquainting himself with old friends that, to a person like me, are just names. For me, it's difficult to see the connections the same way Geralt sees his old friends in Wild Hunt because I only knew The Witcher from the third game, but that's not inherently bad. The game handles itself well for new and returning, but the values are different. I've not had the exposure and free time to engulf myself in the books and previous games. It's pretty fun how our first point of contact is someone we've met before, and the time we started Hearts of Stone, something strangely switched in the background. When a character or a person plays on tropes that come naturally without say, like having a fun first encounter, being good and helpful, being positive in some sort, when they express it themselves and then ask you for a turn or a favor, you already can feel the pitfall. Gaunter O'Dim is the name, and boy did he rub me the wrong way. Thing is, I didn't recognize this guy because the immense gap between finishing the main story and then proceeding to the expansions. He was the friendly traveler at the inn. The only guy to act friendly around the time, and in this world it's a rare feat being seen as anything else but a mutant. Our friendly Gaunter O'Dim only needed a small favor, and as soon as you accepted what he had to say, things immediately took a sharp turn. To toy with these victims is something sickly, but for someone who doesn't have foreseeable bounds, as if he's a god of time, Gaunter can do whatever the hell he chooses to do without the restraint of morality. We can't judge him for his actions because we should be afraid. He himself is an intriguing character that, even after finishing Hearts of Stone, no matter how you finish it, is someone to wonder about. I could rave on about this man being as mysterious, but also not hiding anything. You ask, he answers. And it's not suggestive, designed to tease you about his origins. It's that we can't ask because we won't be able to take it. And us asking why time, he says he chose to learn to control time. He just chose to do it. Like there is no bound between learning something like that. Everything else is boring, so what is he, how is he able to, and what else would he be able to learn? Is time just that powerful? How is he human in form but beastly in his revealed nature? Are there more of him? What are the rules for him? What are bounds? Is magic connected to time? Is he magic? Gaunter is the puppet master that, once you agree to, sets you on a course of what he needs. So there are rules. To not stop the incentive, Gaunter proves his influence without ever revealing more than enough. He does not hesitate to do what's necessary for you to do his bidding. You come to like or dislike this guy, to choose what you eventually want for him as you break out of your own binds, to conclude with one of 3 different endings that can be good, the bad, or the ugly. There's an actual good choice to pick for an ending that stacks odds against you. Well, I did get spoiled by YouTube's algorithms and a catchy thumbnail, so I knew the best ending way before. At least I knew the turnout, but lucky me, my brain is shit. I didn't remember or didn't see much of what needed to be done for the ending. So I ended up being incredibly lucky anyway, as the timer was actually over halfway, giving me anxiety of not being able to do this, then falling into a chain of events until I fell in a place familiar to my brain. I wasn't being smart and I ended up being on the best ending by dumb luck. At the half point, I felt uneased and a bit depressed. There's a typical haunted house at the half point of the story that does get me popping my Quenon entry, but I adore exploring the story behind it, no matter how depressing it is. To go through the haunted house experience and then go on the painted world is a great contrast, and I appreciate it. Painted World's visuals versus the current looking abandoned house is great, but as always, not an entirely safe place in the Witcher's universe. I made choices that may have rid Iris of some doubts, but there are more that remained. I plan to go back and see what else I can do, but as this experience has gone past, I want to immortalize my current perspective. That being, I really wish more for Iris than for Olgierd. The difference and motivator for me to free Olgierd wasn't driven by the perspectives that the game brings. Him being a rich savage that amuses himself with violent action, or that he made the deal he so wishes to never have made to be able to love again, but never really found a way. It's a strong perspective evoking emotions, but in contrast to what Iris is seeing, it's stronger. It's that because of Iris, I saw more of his side, and because of Iris, I decided to save him. I didn't come to choose the lesser evil, I did it for Iris as I couldn't do enough justice for her. Her story is the most depressing, with her literally dying out of sadness. The sadness didn't bring her to take her own life. It didn't make anyone else take her life. It was really just an emotion she continuously felt without stop. It's the crushing feeling that pulls you on the insides and never lets go that killed her after she suffered for so long. Exploring her elements were in the highlight for my experience, no matter how stupid or weird that sounds. And this was the one thing that made me pause my playthrough. I knew I could never bring into words what I understood she felt, but it was incredibly depressing. Just depressing. Perhaps I was reflecting because of my own immature self that could never make hard decisions that I performed in the moments of choosing Iris's fate, and regret it. I just feel that out of everything, this was the most impactful experience for me, personally. The story isn't groundbreaking and subverting expectations, but it shouldn't, because that's Blood and Wine's job at this point. I feel I ended up appreciating the journey more than the destination in the DLC, as if finishing it made me want to go through the events again. Olgierd may have found himself finally free to feel whatever, setting off to his journey, but Hearts of Stone didn't leave me sitting down and saying, "Here I am, I've made it this far." The DLC expansion Hearts of Stone lures you in not by locking the game away from the player, but offering more on an already incredibly structured foundation. With the finishing of Hearts of Stone, I was left to breathe in for a bit, take the moment, and Blood and Wine.
This experience, this place and feeling, how can you make fun of something so typical, make it an inversion of itself, and still lay a huge impact, a heavy blow? What am I on about? Oh, I don't know, everything surrounding Toussaint, the place the Blood and Wine expands to, the vibrant colors, the valorant knights, the noble cause and friendly nature, the wine and more wine, a love story of proving your strength, determined leader that stays in action and plays hero instead of being a diplomat, a textbook fantasy land. A hero story that Blood and Wine sets you up for is an amazing display of how the developers of the game continuously seek ways to subvert expectations, to break the typical and spit in the face of mediocrity. Well, they're nice devs and they aren't really spitting in anyone's face, but the bold actions and smart execution makes their actions speak louder than words. So what's typically the lesson here? Don't judge a book by its cover? Yeah, even that gets shattered as sometimes the fairy tale has been through some shit and sometimes the cover is all you need, but that's only because everything is not aligned to a certain narrative. Not everyone is set out to be the proud nobleman or a lazy peasant. Everything in Blood and Wine screams, judge it by the cover, I dare you. It ends up being an interesting twist as you grin at the fairy tale-esque nature of Toussaint, but also experience the dark side of how hateful and gruesome murders are laid out. It's a fairly standard and predictable fairy tale bound to go wrong that at points the developers once again subvert that understanding that no matter how much you judge either the typical fantasy or undeniably evil, there's motive, gain, and confusion. A lot of confusion. Characters in the game are making moves on judgment, and that's all we can do. We can take judgment of scenarios based on our perspectives and greed, or our own motivations. But we will never end up knowing the full truth, and in this story's case, the developers give the choice to either choose to be nosy and butt in others' business, be very selfish, nosy, and of course pay the price for that, choose to judge none, be the Witcher, and still make this sacrifice, as it's the other's perspective that your perspective can't budge. Take the plunge and come out either repairing as much damage as you can, or simply stop poking in other people's business and not involve yourself in issues that aren't about you. I feel like Blood and Wine is just a very human experience in a fantasy land. As it stands, the story's endings all come with some sacrifice. No happy ever after without a sacrifice. The arguably best ending is to let Regis take the plunge in betraying their simple vampire rule of not killing their own. It's a good rule. He would leave the place regardless of ending, but making Regis make this tough choice is still a sacrifice. It doesn't affect you, it affects him, and why it bothers me is because when a character is well written, making choices on judgment in the dialogue and acting on the same appearance you see, it makes this bridge of familiarity towards him. Yeah, I've only gotten to meet him in Blood and Wine, but soon he became the favorite character that, even if fictional, was hard for me to digest for the ending I stayed with. You hoped for a better turn of events, just as Regis did with no bloodshed, but someone had to take the plunge. The decisions you make you. From the base storyline of Wild Hunt, The Hearts of Stone, and Blood and Wine just reflects upon this the best, which is why it was also fitting that this was our hero's end of journey. Everything is built on this typical humanly structure in this fairy tale land. Every character works its own way and hands in to the Witcher's charm. There is no moral guideline, there is no good and bad, you can't be the judge, and you can't save everyone. We trick ourselves to be productive, to be self-destructive, or keep the complete illusion that Toussaint is a dream to live in. Perhaps I'm digging too deep for meaning, but one thing's for sure, no matter how stereotypical this fairy tale might have come up as, it provoked a thought that is already more than feeling good or bad. And it's a fun thing to come back to keep thinking about. Owning estate for Geralt is real strange, but finally being able to talk to humans with equal respect with no obligation to prove something or chase after something, it's truly where our character's journey should end. Geralt is only deserving of this ending, not dying in a tragic deep thought of, this is the life that the Witcher leads. It's a bleak outlook that's fairly realistic, and certainly unfair things happen to those most deserving of the fair ending, but CDPR gave us the lightest and fairest of endings to The Witcher in Blood and Wine. There's nothing grand to chase after anymore, and we can either seep into their retirement or keep ourselves on the path. The constant calls to action and sleepless nights of just doing one more quest in Wild Hunt is where Blood and Wine gives you the final saying in, this is it, and finally end his journey here, letting the player either wander about exploring every remaining nook and cranny, or finally set it down, take a breath, process it all, and move on.
I so don't feel like going anywhere. Sit here a while longer?
So we shall, my friend. We have witnessed, and in fact on several occasions incited, many great and weighty events. After all that toil, I believe we deserve a bit of a rest.
That we do.